Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, The Path from Listening to Intelligence for Pharmaceutical Brands. If you don't mind, we will wait just another minute or so for all the attendees to join. I'll put you on hold here for around a minute, and then we will get started. Thanks a lot. Hi, welcome back, everyone. So we're going to get started. This, once again, is The Path from Listening to Intelligence for Pharmaceutical Brands. I am Greg Roth, the VP of Global Marketing for Synthesio. Before we get started on the content of the presentation, just a couple of housekeeping items that I need to cover. First and foremost, I want to make sure that everybody can hear me. So if you can hear me, I'd appreciate it if you just make a comment in the chat field. Great, looks like I'm coming through loud and clear. A couple more items of housekeeping before we get started. First and foremost, if you have any questions that arise during the course of the presentation, I encourage you to put them in the Q&A field within the GoToWebinar interface. I will be gathering those questions throughout the broadcast, and I will address as many as I can at the conclusion of the content portion of the presentation. If I don't get to your questions, rest assured we are recording them, and we will reach out to you by email to answer any questions that we didn't cover during the broadcast. Secondly, this webinar, the broadcast of the webinar, will be available at the conclusion of the broadcast. We will send these to you by email so that you can reference the webinar afterwards. Last but not least, you can always follow Synthesio on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. They're at Synthesio on each one of those social networks. So we're going to jump right into the presentation now. Just a brief intro here. I'm Greg Roth, the VP of Marketing for Synthesio again. Synthesio is a social intelligence technology company. What we do is help the largest brands in the world cut through social noise, find conversations that matter to their brands, measure their online reputation, manage consumer relationships, which ultimately will go towards boosting the ROI of all social activities. So what we're going to do today is talk about a couple of pieces of Synthesio technology and how they can be used to really improve your business results and solve a lot of the problems that pharmaceutical marketers have in the digital age. So I figured the best way to get started was with an example that should resonate to everybody in the audience today. What happens when the world's top influencer posts about a medicine she's been prescribed on social media? In 2015, Kim Kardashian was pregnant, and she posted on Twitter and Instagram about a anti-morning sickness drug that she had been taking. This caused a lot of backlash as she didn't abide by the regulations that are typically required of pharmaceutical companies, particularly if it is perceived as advertising or marketing. So Kim Kardashian quickly took down the first Instagram post that she had put up and basically went about the path of trying to correct the problem with the help of the pharmaceutical company, which I hope I say the name right, Duquesne, who makes the drug Diclegis. I hope I get those pronunciations right. So Kim took to Instagram to correct the problem, first of all, by including the correct regulatory phrasing in the post that she put out. But this wasn't the end of the story. So what ended up happening is Kim's got so many followers out there on social media that this caused a bit of a groundswell of viral activity, and she continued to post about her morning sickness and the prescription that she was taking. So you see here two posts that happened after the kind of the initial viral boost. And the things that you'll notice here are A, these are paid ads through Instagram. B, Kim Kardashian was sure to use the correct vocabulary and the correct regulatory phrasing that's required of any type of pharmaceutical advertising. But the thing that I felt was most interesting about this was the fact that she basically went from being an unsigned sponsor to an organically grown sponsor to an official sponsor. So throughout the course of this social posting, she went from brand advocate to paid sponsor. And this is something that is unique, particularly in the pharmaceutical marketplace, but it's something that you need to be looking out for no matter what type of business you're marketing, because celebrities and influencers are out there on social media talking to huge crowds, and we should be able to leverage the power that they have to influence people. So moving from this example to basically the challenges of pharmaceutical marketing, there's a lot of hurdles to leap. And these are obstacles that every pharmaceutical marketer spends their days trying to overcome. We'll go through these briefly, and then what we're going to do throughout the course of this presentation is talk about how we can begin to approach these obstacles and hurdle them and actually come up with some solutions to facilitate your job as a pharmaceutical marketer. So in terms of the obstacles, these should be relatively familiar to you. Obviously, the number one obstacle to any business is going to be the competition. So in pharmaceutical marketing, the market can be crowded not just with brand names, but with generics. Everybody is spending money on advertising. It can be really difficult to differentiate yourself, which brings us to the second obstacle here, which is value creation and brand building. So how do you communicate that differentiation and the value prop of your particular drug, and how do you develop consumer trust? Can you do that through advertising? Can you do it through content marketing? Well, it's becoming particularly more difficult to do that in the U.S. in this day and age, because you're fighting against the obstacle of lawmakers. So the political climate in the U.S. right now over the pricing of prescription medications, over the opioid crisis, has been detrimental to the brand health of pharmaceuticals overall. So how do we fight this, and how do we measure the impact that it's having on our brand? And that brings us to the next obstacle, which is data. That you have data coming in from all over the place. You have performance data from marketing. You have personally protected information from patients. You have your CRM data that you've collected over the years. What do we do with it? How do we measure it? Which brings us to the next obstacle to pharmaceutical marketing, which is regulations. Obviously this should be the thing that's at the top. It's the thing that causes kind of the most pain points for pharmaceutical marketers. How do you abide by compliance, regulations, rules? How do you make sure that on social media in particular, you're monitoring for adverse events and reporting those as you're required to do? The next obstacle to pharmaceutical marketing is the market structure. How things are set up here in the United States. You basically have a triangle between physicians, patients, and pharmaceutical companies, where you have pharmaceutical reps trying to push particular pills on physicians, who are then prescribing those pills to patients, even if the patients themselves are interested in another medication. So you have this really difficult way of trying to reach your particular customers, and that is one of the primary things we're going to cover today, which is really getting to know these buckets of customers that are typical to pharmaceutical marketing. Next, we have demographic factors. These are your common macro factors: shifts in patient population and disease patterns. Is the American population getting older? Are there new diseases that are becoming more prevalent? So being sure that you're monitoring basically the overall macro structure of American demographics is important to your R&D and to your marketing overall. And then obviously the thing that I brought up at the beginning, the risk reward of social media. This is the Kardashian effect. Things can go great, things can be a disaster. We see how Kim Kardashian and the pharmaceutical company were able to turn a potential disaster in terms of breaking of regulations into something that was a major reward for them, getting the world's biggest influencer to sign on board as an official sponsor. So how are we going to leap over these hurdles? What are we going to do to get beyond these obstacles? The way that we do things at Synthesio to help our clients overcome the problems that they have is to try to align the solutions that we have with the problems that they are experiencing. So it's all really about getting to know your audience when it comes to social intelligence. That's why you're listening to conversations that are going on the mainstream web and social media. It's why you want to know more about what it is that makes your audience tick. This is going to help you in the long run to solve a lot of these problems because you're going to get to know your audience better and how to address the issues that are common amongst pharmaceutical marketers. So I broke things down here into basically two different silos. On the left is social listening, on the right is audience insights. So when we're talking about social listening, that's about monitoring the web for conversations that are happening at all times. And we break this into three separate use cases for pharmaceuticals, and that's brand health, crisis management, and audience analysis. So what can you do by listening to all of these conversations online? First and foremost, you're going to be able to monitor your brand health. So you're going to gauge the sentiment and perceptions of your consumers, but not just about your brands, about your competitors' brands as well, because you'll be able to learn an awful lot of market intelligence based on what people are saying about competing medications. The next logical step from brand health is how do we handle crisis? What happens if something bad occurs online? What are the steps that we need to take to make sure that we can proactively get ahead of this and control the issue if it actually ends up happening? So this is all about monitoring for your brand in conjunction for adverse events and compliance regulations, but it's also just a general way to gauge your brand health, whether it's going up or down, whether more people are talking about your brand, your competitor's brand, and we'll get into a bit more details about how we do that in a bit. Last but not least, on the social listening side is audience analysis. This is really about qualitatively digging into the mentions that people are making about your brand to understand the drivers and barriers of treatment in the vernacular of patients. So not how you talk within the pharmaceutical industry or you talk as a marketer, but how these particular buckets of people speak about their illness, about the treatments that they're taking, and about the medications that they might have been prescribed. On the right-hand side of things, we have audience insights. So this is not so much about social listening as it is about getting to understand what it is that makes your audience tick. So what we're able to do here at Synthesio is profile audiences from email, from Facebook, and really give you a clear-cut picture of what brands they're following, what media types resonate with them, and what types of hobbies and activities they might have, what influencers they follow. So I'll get into a bit more detail about the technical specifics of that as I speak about those things. Right now, just to cover these three additional use cases, we're going to learn about how you're going to be able to choose the right traditional and digital channels to deliver your message to your target audiences through media planning. We're going to talk about selecting the right partners and sponsors to help you deliver your message to a pre-engaged audience. And then we're going to talk about the ultimate roll-up here. What type of content do you want to put out there to these consumers that you've gotten to know? You obviously want relevant, resonant content that's attractive to them and really leverages their lifestyle behaviors, their likes, their advocacies to give them content that is meaningful. So moving on to the next slide, you can see that the first step here is aligning these obstacles with solutions. So in going back to those initial problems, the hurdles that pharmaceutical marketing encounters, you can see I've broken it down basically into two buckets. Again, data and demographic factors. We're going to handle those data issues with Synthesio social listening. We're going to handle those demographic factors with Profiler. And you'll see as we walk through these use cases exactly how we're going to do that. So just a bit about data and demographics. These are the two big buckets. And what we're going to do is talk a bit about social listening first. That is the Synthesio tool that sources mainstream social and internet data via API and web crawler. We enrich every single mention that comes into our system with robust metadata about the content, the author, the tone, the sentiment, and then we roll these up into a quantitative dashboard which will allow you to measure the performance of organic and basically start tracking your social listening success. We're doing this in every country around the world in over 70 languages. We're processing billions of mentions per month. And on the opposite side of things here, we have audience insights. Profiler is a tool that we have here at Synthesio that takes consumer profiling and market research to the next level by basically allowing you to analyze the data that lies behind Facebook. So we've created a tool here that allows us to compare specific audiences to Facebook as a whole and then be able to generate the affinities of those audiences based on a statistical correction. We're tracking over 4,000 brands, over 3,000 interests and activities, and over 2,000 influencers and celebrities on the social graph. So we'll get to that in the latter half of the presentation. To start, we're going to talk about social listening. So the first use case that I brought up was brand health, and that's all about gauging sentiment and perception of your brand and your competitor's brand. And what you can see here on the slide is I split it into two different sections. On the left-hand side is your brand. On the right-hand side is your competitor's brand. So when we're looking at your specific brands, the important thing here to do is not just to look at sentiment overall, but to look at sentiment across channels by media type and then by country if you're a global pharmaceutical concern, so that you can begin to track down what are the pain points and what are the value props within each one of these audiences in each country and each social network. The thing that's important to remember here, and I'm sure that you know this as pharmaceutical marketers, is that traditional social networks like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and LinkedIn are not that popular when it comes to talking about the treatments and the suffering of diseases. Most of the activity that goes on around pharmaceutical brands and their treatments takes place on forums, specifically because forums allow users to be anonymous, much like Twitter does, but Twitter has, their short character limit. Forums allow the ability to follow strings, post long form content, ask questions, respond to questions. So it really is perfect for the three buckets that we're going to talk about in terms of patients, caregivers, and physicians. So you could see on the left, looking at kind of the overall roll-up of quantitative data to gauge the sentiment is really, really important, but also digging into that qualitative data to look at these individual mentions, to see the vocabulary that your consumers are using to speak about the treatments. What are their pain points specifically in terms of the keywords that they're using? Now, you can take that knowledge about your own brand and then start to roll that into your analysis of your competitors' brands, and you can start to look at what it is that is negative about your competitors' brands, what it is that's positive, and what it is that's neutral. One of the things that's important to remember here is that you can leverage your competitor's weakness and take advantage of their strengths by basically copycatting what they're doing in order to market to their consumers. The other thing, again, that's always important is to look beyond the data, beyond the quantitative roll-up of your numbers into the qualitative mentions. So obviously in tracking your own brands, you're going to see what the pain points are of your consumers in their own vocabulary. You're going to see those same pain points about your competitors' brands, and you'll be able to use those pain points to market against them. The next step here in terms of our use case progression towards social intelligence is crisis management. And this is about monitoring for your brand in conjunction with adverse events and compliance regulations. So our social listening system is query-based, meaning that you basically put in keywords, which we then listen for through API and web crawling to drag into our dashboard for you to be able to display and quantitatively measure. But kind of an add-on to this is the ability to set alerts. So what alerts will allow you to do is either set a real-time alert, so whenever a mention about a particular keyword or drug comes into your dashboard, you'll be alerted by email immediately so you can respond immediately. Then obviously there's a lower impact level of alert where you basically schedule them to come in certain times of day. And then there's a third type of alert which allows you to set your alerting based on volume. So if it goes over, if your amount of mentions goes over a particular threshold that is higher than average or lower than average, you can set to have alerts pushed to you for that. When it comes to pharma, I think that the most important thing here is the fact that we're able to record and track all mentions that could potentially get you in trouble, and then also be able to surface those to you via email as quickly as possible so that you're not reliant on logging into your listening dashboard every single day and searching through for these compliance regulations, adverse events, all of the things that you need to look for. So that's going to handle your crisis management. You've learned to look at your brand's health, the sentiment, the qualitative mentions to see what people are talking about, how they feel. You're now protecting yourself against any types of issues that can occur on social media when people mention your drug. And then obviously you want to start looking at your audience when it comes to social listening. And this is the thing that I've repeated again and again. When it comes to social listening, quantitative data is very, very important. It's the type of thing that you're going to want to roll up to your boss and show them that you're doing things well. It's very easy to look at, and it's visual, and you could get a quick picture of, what's going on the internet around your brand. But when you really want to get to know your customer and get that market intelligence that you need to help market your drug, you really need to dig into that qualitative data. So that is reading through the text of these mentions to figure out what are the drivers and barriers to treatment in the vernacular of patients, physicians, and caregivers. So these three big buckets of consumers, patients, physicians, and caregivers, are going to drive our audience analysis. It's very unique in pharma to have three such defined general buckets of consumers. You don't find this like if you're Nordstrom and trying to market to people. You can't generalize your buckets as much as pharma can. So this is an advantage that you need to take and leverage. So when it comes to these people, patients, physicians, and caregivers, what are they doing on the internet, particularly in forums and blogs? They're seeking information, they're seeking emotional support, and then there's the flip side, they're providing the support and information that people need. Most of this is going on in forums, and you can see, despite my redaction of all of these mentions, is that what ends up happening is forums are drivers of these conversations, and you really start to get to see how people are talking about their illness, the medications they're taking, and exactly how they're dealing with their sickness. So they're going to seek information. If they're taking a new drug, they're going on to forums to ask about side effects, to ask about how long does it take till the drug kicks in. They're talking about potentially horror stories that they've heard from friends who might have been taking that drug. So that kind of rolls into a seeking of information. They're looking for feedback from people. Then there are the people who are just seeking emotional support. They're feeling alone and scared about having a particular disease, and they're just looking for somebody to, even if it's anonymous, to reassure them that everything is going to be okay. Maybe it's somebody else who has taken this treatment in the past. Perhaps it's a caregiver who's treating a patient with this illness and is taking this drug and can reassure them. Perhaps it'll be a doctor who can go in and really ease their mind. And that's really kind of where Reddit comes in. So Reddit has exploded into the most popular forum in the United States. It obviously grants people the ability to be anonymous, and doctors and physicians have really taken to Reddit as a place to answer the questions that their patients and caregivers are asking. So they're doing this through the AMAs, and in many cases, what ends up happening is other patients end up jumping into these support forums, posting videos about their experiences undergoing treatment or taking specific drugs. So, you know, we're following a progression here of people seeking information and emotional support and then getting it through forums on the internet. So by looking at all of this qualitative mentions, you're going to start to learn how every single one of these three buckets speaks. Now, that's going to bring us to the second side of things here when it comes to solving your issues as a pharmaceutical marketer, and that is, how do we reach this audience that we've learned so much about? So the first thing here in terms of reaching the audience is going to be all about media planning. It's about making the right channel choices to deliver the right messages to your target audience. So what I did was I profiled 3 specific audiences on Facebook. This is an audience of physicians, an audience of patients, and an audience of caregivers. By crunching through all of the things that they talk about, interact with, the videos that they watch, what they're posting about in Facebook Messenger, we have access to all of this anonymized data, which could then get rolled up into the affinities of these particular groups. So when it comes to these groups, you can see that they're very, very different, and you can start to paint a picture or a persona of each one of these groups. When it comes to physicians, we're looking at people who read People magazine and the Wall Street Journal. They watch Discovery Channel and CBS on TV, and they are visiting Google and the Huffington Post on the internet. If you look across the board here with patients and caregivers, the publications, the broadcast channels, the web channels are all different. Now, the thing to draw out of this and to begin your analysis of your consumers and start to really put this persona together is to start to think about what it is these type of people are looking for in these channels and what it is that's resonating. So when we look at the caregivers, we can see that there's almost a singular obsession with the health of their patients. They're reading Health Magazine. They're on WebMD. They're spiritual people. They're listening to K-Love, a public spiritual radio broadcast. They're watching Hallmark Channel movies. So this is somebody who's kind of in touch with their feelings. They're sentimental, sympathetic type of person. So you can use that information to target them with your messaging, and that messaging is going to roll on WebMD, on AOL, on USAtoday.com. You might roll commercials on the Hallmark Channel or on K-Love. So you're going to be able to take this information and know exactly where you can hit the specific audience. Again, with patients, you're seeing people who read Good Housekeeping. They watch HGTV. They're on Reddit, as we said before, because they want to get answers to their questions. And they're on Care2, which is basically the world's largest, philanthropic community is basically what I would call it. It's people who care about the world. So when trying to figure out how you're going to reach your patient, you may start thinking about building messaging around home improvement or the home, because you know that that's something that resonates with these patients. When it comes to your physicians, you can see that when they're online, the last thing that they want to think about is health, medications, illnesses. So perhaps marketing to physicians in a way that lets them forget about their day-to-day job would be the best path. So now we'll dig a little bit deeper here into sponsorships and partnerships. So this is all about choosing the right partner to help you deliver your value proposition. Now, when it comes to pharma, this is a bit more difficult because you can't exactly co-partner with Diet Coke on a commercial or a magazine advertisement. But there are deeper ways that you can partner with these brands, or even not officially partner, but begin to learn a lot about your audience, the things that resonate with them, and then you can use these data points in your messaging and your television commercials. So for instance, again, we'll start on the right. We'll look at caregivers. We can begin to paint a picture of someone who likes coffee, loves to read things online, perhaps is spending half of their time being a caregiver and half of their time potentially selling cosmetics through Avon. There's someone that is spending time online researching health and home improvement. They are frugal when it comes to their vacation. They stay at Holiday Inn. And they are also frugal when it comes to their shopping. They go to Dollar Tree. They use the U.S.'s largest supermarket, Kroger. They love Bed Bath & Beyond, and they shop at Belk department stores. So how do we leverage this information to begin to use this person? To leverage this information and use this information to reach these caregivers? Perhaps you feature coffee in your commercials. Perhaps you feature home improvement as kind of a theme of one of your magazine ads. And then there's always the opportunity when a large business like Keurig or Coca-Cola sponsors an event, let's say it's a golf tournament, then there's an opportunity for you to jump on board as a secondary sponsor because you know that the primary sponsor already resonates with your target audience. Again, we can look at each of the patients and the physicians and start to see the things that resonate with them. When it comes to patients, again, caffeine is big, but the thing that I think is most interesting here about patients is this desire to capture life moments. Perhaps if you're terminally ill, you develop an interest in photography so you can capture these life moments. So that's where we see Polaroid coming in here. Again, WebMD is a huge service for patients. They're looking for more information about their illness. These people are going on Disney cruise lines. They're spending time online creating lists on Ranker, and they are shopping for healthy food at Trader Joe's. And again, it seems to be about keeping the home looking nice with Pier 1 imports. When it comes to the physicians, here's somebody who is not talking about health online or reading about health online, but is obviously interested in leading a healthier lifestyle. Your physician uses allergy-tested, 100% fragrance-free makeup. They are not drinking cow's milk or dairy. They're driving around in a Volvo, which is known to be one of the safest cars on the road. And when they're at home, they're not thinking about medicine. They're not thinking about their patients. They're thinking about their home for the most part. These look to be nesters. So they're looking for new homes, and they're looking for how to improve their home through Etsy, through Lowe's, through TJ Maxx, and you can start to see a picture of who these people are, what their potential income levels are, what their potential genders are, and what it is that's going to resonate with them in the messaging that you put out. Last but not least, we kind of roll this all up into content marketing. So this is what type of content do you want to hit these big buckets with, these audiences with, and how are you going to hit them? So we'll start on the left this time with the physicians. So you can see that while it's obvious that all of these people are on Facebook because that's where we're drawing the data from, each one of the audiences has a secondary social network that they might be interested in. So when it comes to physicians, they're not on YouTube, they're not on Twitter, but they're using Instagram and Pinterest. And what are they talking about? What are they interested in? What are they posting about when they're on these social networks? Politics is big with physicians, as is theater, environmentalists, animal welfare. So you get this picture of a physician who cares about the world, and they're posting about it and they're interacting with it on these three channels. Interestingly enough, the top three personalities that resonate with physicians are Kim Zolciak, a housewife of Atlanta, Keith Urban, a country music star and a judge on The Voice, and politician Elizabeth Warren. So while the politician here, Miss Warren, might not be the correct choice for a sponsor, you have two people, one rather famous, one not so famous, who might be leveraged to reach this audience of physicians. When it comes to patients, we have a little bit of a different skew with the social networks. They are not on Pinterest, but they're on Twitter as well as Instagram and Facebook. And when we look at their interests and the things that they're talking about online, the things they're interacting with, it's home improvement, horror novels, business and sales, and sailing. So you get this picture of the type of content you can start to push towards patients based around home improvement, based around getting out on the open seas, based around perhaps working from home while you're undergoing treatment. So there's a whole lot of things here tidbits of information that you can use to inform your content marketing. Again, our sponsors here kind of range the gamut from Martha Stewart on kind of the television influencer personality side of things. Your patients are listening to Tom Petty. That might be a statistical correction due to Tom Petty's recent death. So he probably was creating a lot more viral activity online. And then Andrew Sullivan, somebody that you might not recognize. Andrew Sullivan is a conservative pundit who comes from England, and he used to be the editor of the New Republic. And interestingly enough, he's an anti-Trump conservative. So you get a picture of your patients here as a more conservative group of people, but also people who have a little wild side. They like their horror novels. And then on our last group here, we have caregivers. Caregivers are basically only on Facebook when it comes to their affinity for a social network. They are posting and interacting with messaging about spirituality, nutrition, gardening, and shopping online. So again, you're getting this very clear-cut picture. You have 3 totally different buckets of personas. And in this persona of caregivers, you have Oprah Winfrey, Reba McEntire, and David Wolf. And again, this is like, you're looking at 2 rather famous people, and David Wolf, who is a vegan raw food diet proponent. So he's actually known as David Avocado Wolf. So when it comes to caregivers, they're singularly obsessed with this nutrition and healthy living and keeping their patients healthy for longer. So we've seen all of these things in terms of media planning, sponsorships, and content marketing. Well, what do we do with it? We've gathered a lot of information. How do we organize it so that we can begin to leverage it and start talking to these people? And we do that by creating personas. So the first persona we create is for a physician. Our physician's name is Susie. She's 35 to 54 years old. She's married, college educated, obviously, as a physician, and she has school-age children. She commutes to work not on public transportation, but by using Uber or Lyft, and she uses her Samsung phone to summon her commuting car every day. She's a frequent international traveler. She visits expat friends around the world. She loves documentaries and rock music. She's most likely to live in the upper Rust Belt. So when you take all of those demographic points, those interests, those affinities, you begin to see how you can hyper-target these type of people, particularly if you're going to be doing your advertising on Facebook, because you could begin to narrow down your audiences by age, by relationship status, by education status, by child status. So as you're drilling deeper into these audiences, you know for a fact that the messaging you're putting together based on the chart below of all the things that resonate with them, that this messaging is typically likely to resonate. So these personas help you tremendously in basically creating an outlet to market to the people that you need to market to. Next, we have the patient persona. So Heather, our patient, is an older woman. She's 55 to 65 plus. She's married, she's college educated, and she has adult children. She works from home in her job as a personal care home services salesperson. This makes sense, as I mentioned earlier. If you're a patient suffering from an illness, you might be looking for a way to generate extra revenue while you're stuck at home. She enjoys her daily trip to Starbucks. She pays for her purchase with her iPhone. She's an aspiring photographer, and she's passionate about the environment. She's most likely to live in the American Midwest. So again, you use this information to narrow down your options to target people on Facebook or through traditional advertising, and you can begin to hit this patient with the messaging that is most resonant for her. Last but not least, we've put together our caregiver persona of Jane, who's 46 to 65, again, married and college educated. She has adult children. She's a public transportation commuter. She works as an educational administrator, which allows her to have time to continue her caregiving at home, but also have like a predictable short schedule during the day. And during her commute, she kills time either by reading on her Kindle or by playing games on her Android phone. She's a passionate community volunteer. She walks for exercise and she hates sports. And she's most likely to live in one of the 4 most populous states in our country. And again, you get this picture of how you're going to be able to reach Jane, our caregiver, with messaging. Like I mentioned before, feature things about home improvement, about gardening, nutrition, spirituality in your messaging to this caregiver as you target her on Facebook, and you're more likely to see results. So where does that leave us? It leaves us with these hurdles that we're going to begin to jump over. We're going to overcome these obstacles to pharmaceutical marketing through these 2 major buckets. We're going to solve your data problem with Synthesio, which is going to be able to organize and quantify all of the information that's happening on the internet around your brand. And we're going to use Profiler to investigate the demographic factors that are driving the consumers who are using your product. And the way that we're going to do this is by first looking at the data through Synthesio. We'll look at the competition and we'll look at our own brands to determine our brand health and where we sit in the marketplace. We'll look at regulations and adverse events and how to fix those through crisis management and alerting. We'll look at your market structure and begin to determine who it is in your audience and how they're talking about their illness and the treatments that they're taking. And on the demographic side, we're going to be able to address those lawmakers who are bad-mouthing the pharmaceutical industry through the targeting that we do on Facebook. Need to thank the U.S. election of 2016 here. Despite whatever messaging a lawmaker puts out, there's always a way to counteract it. When it comes to the risk-reward of social media, this is all about sponsorships, finding those voices that resonate with the people who are using your treatments, finding the products that they like, and determining basically what it is that resonates with them based on the brands they have an affinity for. And last but not least, and the most important thing for you as a pharmaceutical brand, is that value creation, the brand building. You're going to do that through content marketing. You're going to do that by reaching your 3 buckets of patients, caregivers, and physicians with content that makes sense to them, that resonates to them, that informs them, that educates them, and helps them to deal with what they're dealing with, whether it's an illness or helping to treat someone with an illness. So you can see how you could begin to address all of these problems using social listening, social intelligence, audience analysis. And this is just the beginning. As you get deeper into the data, you'll start to be able to crunch these smaller audiences, these buckets, into smaller buckets based on the types of doctors we're talking about, the caregivers for specific types of diseases, or the patients who are suffering from specific illnesses. So that would be the next step in our progression to building personas, is these really targeted personas and drilling down into what it is that makes these audiences at a micro level tick. So that's basically it. I hope I succeeded in helping you solve some of the problems that you face day to day as a pharmaceutical marketer. So we've reached the Q&A portion of our broadcast, and it looks like we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Give me a second here as I look through the questions that have come in. So I'll address this one because it's pretty simple for me to address. There's a couple of people here, and I'll roll this up into just a generalized question, asking to know how Profiler works in terms of how are we generating these affinities, and how do we know that these particular buckets of people like these things. It's a complex process, but I'll try to simplify it as best I can. So essentially, what we're doing is comparing one audience against another on Facebook. So what I did in particular for this study was I took the audience of, for example, physicians on Facebook, people talking about physicians, people who are physicians, people who are interacting with content from physicians, and I rolled that all up into a single audience that, let's say, was 12 million U.S. citizens. we take those 12 million US citizens and we compare them to the Facebook audience as a whole in the United States. So let's say that's 500 million people. And then what we begin to do is see differences between the two audiences and be able to surface the affinities of our target audience, which is the physician. So while 17.5% of people overall on Facebook might like Starbucks. They might be interacting with Starbucks, watching Starbucks videos, posting about Starbucks. If that's 17% of the total population, but 22% of our population of physicians is interacting with Starbucks, we know that they have an affinity. They're greater than the average population on Facebook that's interacting with a particular brand or topic or keyword. So that's how we're able to generate these affinities. The greater the difference in percentage between that overall audience and our target audience, the greater the affinity. So that's how we came up with all these logos, these interests, these influencers, is they typically skew towards the smaller audience rather than the larger audience. I hope that answered that question. One of the other things that I'll add on here is that your target audience doesn't necessarily have to come from Facebook. You can actually upload your email lists from your CRM and compare that as a lookalike audience to Facebook as a whole. So really powerful stuff here. It doesn't necessarily have to be the anonymized Facebook data that you're crunching. You could actually come out with profiles of your exact customers that you've got in your database. The second question I will address here is about influencers. So the gist of the question is basically, how do we track influencers, and is there a way to see everything that they're saying rather than just mentions about a brand? Yes, so we build what are called influencer dashboards here at Synthesio. So they're a little bit different than your typical dashboard. The data that you looked at that was blinded earlier, the mentions that you saw earlier, came from our typical brand health dashboard, which is based on keyword queries, essentially the names of your medications, your competitors' medications, the treatments, and basically we're scrubbing the internet for all incidences of those words and then dragging them into a dashboard. When it comes to influencers, what we're able to do is basically supplement that by pulling in anything that is said about the influencer or said by the influencer themselves. So it's basically like creating a mini owned media dashboard of a particular user. You can also create multiple influencer dashboards. If you have 20 people that you want to track, then it goes beyond the keyword level to just dragging in all of the mentions that come from particular people. It looks like I've reached the end of my time. I'm getting the high sign that I've got to wrap things up. So if you have put a question in the question and answer field, we'll be sure to get back to you via email with an answer to your question. And I'd just like to wrap things up here by saying thank you for joining us today. Once again, the broadcast will be sent to you via email a little bit later in the day. If you have any questions or comments, you can always reach us on Twitter at Synthesio, on Facebook at Synthesio. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So once again, thank you very much for joining me today on our social intelligence webinar for pharma brands, and we'll see you next time.